Okay, so I'd like to welcome everyone here. If you don't know me, I'm Gloria Palmer, the Executive Director of Green Mountain Academy for Lifelong Learning. And we are just thrilled, as always, to partner with the Manchester Historical Society, but we're also thrilled to be in this historic building. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention one other program that we will be holding here in March. It's on the 24th, Tuesday. And author Jack Kelly will be in conversation with John Graff, who is the history teacher at Burton Academy. He's going to talk about his book, Tom Paine's War, and that will be here at 5:30 in the courthouse, and we hope you'll join us for that. Just want to say a thank you to GNAT-TV for being here. Thank you to Shawn, who's the curator at the Manchester Historical Society, and to Bill Badger, who serves on
long and suffering board of directors.
Yes, and I would like to invite Bill up to the microphone so he can tell you a little bit about this building.
Thank you, Gloria. For those who don't know, when Vermont was getting organized, Bennington County couldn't decide on the county seat. Between Bennington and Manchester, neither one wanted to give ground, so they settled on a two-shire county, the South Shire and the North Shire, and two courthouses. And this is the North Shire Courthouse. And it worked that way for maybe 150, 160 years. The side judges always seem to have been from Bennington because Bennington has more voters. And they would love to have gotten rid of the Manchester courthouse, and occasionally they would say it needs work, we're going to get rid of it. And there'd be a cocktail party in town, the hat would get passed, and money would come up to fix the roof or whatever needed to be done. So we've limped along with the second courthouse, and finally the side judges decided that enough was enough. It wasn't air conditioned, didn't have the backup and the computers and stuff that besides, they probably didn't like to drive from Bennington. So it was given up, and it reverted to the town because the town gave the land. Now, the village office is down below, so the village and the town both have interest in the building. It's been called the Queen of the Village because it's right in the middle of the village and it's prominent. So, there's an effort to, the town has to deal with it, the village has to deal with it, and a group has been formed, the North Shire Community, North Shire Courthouse Committee, to kind of organize the whole thing and get everybody to play nicely together. And it's an old building, 1822, and renovations and additions since then, but it needs work. And 25 years ago, a guest at the Equinox across the way looked across and said, "Ooh, that building's in rough shape," and footed the bill to remove the dome and have the bullet holes repaired and gilded. It's one of two gilded domes in the state, and the other one's in Montpelier. So that work has been done, but some of the work that was done 25 years ago needs repair. The roof needs work. Our beautiful 1970s vintage drop ceiling would be nice if it went away. There are a lot of things to do. So the courthouse committee is hard at work, and if anyone is interested in getting involved in it, Sarah McClintock is right here, or talk to me. And we're underway trying to bring the building back and keep it for public use like this, rather than private offices or a bar. This is what it should be. Anything else? All right, tell me to shut up.
All right, have a good night, everybody.
Let's talk about trains.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, actually, this is the inaugural talk in the courthouse, so it's kind of exciting. So it'll be. So thank you, Gloria, for inviting us to speak here tonight, and the courthouse committee for making it available for us. You know, to all the supporters of the Manchester Historical Society and the great board that gives us the encouragement to get out into the community. And tonight, Bill and I are going to talk about the Manchester, Dorset, and Granville Railroad, the quarries, and try to demonstrate to the best of our abilities, and sometimes our limited abilities, of why the road was built, where it went, and what evidence we can see here today in the Northshire, and the legacy of the era of the buildings that were built out of all that, and as well as you can actually go walk along a good section of it today on the rail trail. So this was not easy to try to put together. I've given the Marble Talk several times, and I've taken a lot of input from people what they couldn't see and what they could figure out, and that I was talking too fast and there weren't enough pictures. So there's gonna be a lot of slides, but I'm excited to be able to share this with you. And you know, I really wanted to just say, you know, it's the steadfast commitment of some visionaries who made the rail trail come together. And, you know, we could probably stand up here and do an hour about just what they went through, but it'll be at the end of this program, and I just really wanted to say how appreciative I am personally, because I've walked on the rail trail quite a bit. And I wanted to thank Dave Cannell for taking up the challenge of writing down the who, what, where, and when of how the whole rail trail came together and to become the community resource that it is today. Because when I asked him to do it, I said, well, you know, this all started about 15 years ago. So, you know, and memories fade. And so I really wanted to thank him. So, you know, why are we here? You know, it all started with this. It was the contract for the New York Public Library at 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. And the Norcross brothers of Worcester, Massachusetts were one of the preeminent building contractors of the era, especially working in stone. The contract was for about $2.8 million, and this was in 1899, 1900. So even though they came in, they were the higher bid by $70,000. Ultimately, the committee that was in charge of it chose them just because of their expertise in building. So when we say Norcross West, what is Norcross West? Well, it's two people. Orlando Whitney, O.W. Norcross, he came to Dorset looking for white marble. He'd seen this white marble from the Freedley quarries, which are up in Dorset, all over Philadelphia. So he knew that it called for pure white marble. So he came up here looking for a quarry and a business partner. And he found that business partner in Spafford Holly West, and together they formed the Norcross West Company in 1900. You know, they decided on a spot near the old Underhill Quarry. The Underhill Quarry is a little bit south of the swimming quarry. I know they say that this was the site of it, and Bill will probably chime in on this in a little bit, which was the first commercially operating quarry in 1785. So they needed over 500,000 cubic feet just for this one contract. So when they came up, they partnered up, and in 1900, they basically hit the ground running. This is actually the quarry. This is where you see they've only taken down one layer of marble. And, you know, it was going to require significant infrastructure, both in Manchester and Dorset. You know, this is in addition to the Norcross brothers. They had operations in Worcester, Massachusetts, Providence, Rhode Island, and they opened up further a depot down in Tuckahoe, New York, where all the materials would be staged before it went down to the work site. So, you know, the quarrying started immediately. So just to set the stage, and this is what I want to do so that way everybody knows these places we're talking about. These are from Google Maps. You're going to see these a few times, just so you can get an idea of where the quarries are. Everybody's familiar with this swimming quarry. So the large swimming quarry is on the left. You recognize that? Well, not everybody knows, unless you've been around for a while, that there's two other quarries. The Plateau Quarry, which is set up the hill a little bit, and as I understand, that's where if you wanted to see the nude sunbathers back in the 50s and the 60s, that's where you went. And then the smaller Cody Quarry. And actually, your cousin did some work on the Cody Quarry, didn't he? He's the one who said that's probably where it was.
My cousin was the geologist for Vermont Marble, and marble was his thing. And he said the Cody Quarry was the original quarry in the area. And there were lots of quarries. There were 30-some quarries along this vein of marble between here and the Danby Quarry along the side of the mountain. And they would get in and work on a quarry for a while. The earliest quarries, everything was split out by hand, were the ones that the rock had been exposed and the layers were cracked. So they could put a wedge in there and crack out a flat stone for a doorstep or a lintel or a windowsill. And then as they got into mechanical channeling, those quarries were no good because you got a block out and it had a crack through it. So the needs of the industry changed over time. So some of these early quarries came and went. And they may have worked, they found some rock on the surface and they played with it for a while and then they ran out of stone. It ran to the bottom. So the Cody quarry was supposedly the first, but it's in the same basic vein of marble.
And you can see it if you're driving by just before you get to the swimming quarry. If you look over the marble blocks, you can actually see the Cody quarry, especially this time of year.
What I find is interesting about this is if you see this line right
You
through
have to stay
here,
in front of the mic.
you see the line through here, that was the road. And when they built the quarry, they cut the road off. So they built the road around it. But you can still see the signs of it through the parking lot and through, you just, this time of year looking, you'll see the original highway.
Yeah, if you don't speak through the microphone, all the people at home watching this on live stream, you're gonna be like, what is he saying?
Oops.
So this gives you an idea. So this was the start in Dorset. And down in Manchester, they started grading for a new mill. They started in mid-October 1901, the foundation was complete, and they finished by the end of November, and the building was basically completed and ready for occupancy by 1902. A steam boiler and engine was the power for the mill. It was outfitted with 8 gang saws, rubbing beds, and a large overhead traveling crane. And that traveling crane is actually pointed out. So if you were today, anybody who's driven from the post office down Richville Road and you come to the railroad tracks, you can see the railroad crossing, you would be looking and you'd see the child care place in Earth and Sea. That was originally that's where the Norcross West marble mill was. And it was an enormous site. So this is another shot. So where that big circle is, that's where the mill was. So Earth and Sea is there. Oh, apparently we have an Aflac outlet there too. I didn't know that. Huh. Interesting. It was about 14.5 acres, that whole site. And we were going to talk plenty about this site down the road here. Progress was quick. I mean, as we even can see through photos, once they started quarrying down, it went pretty quick. I mean, they were piling marble everywhere they could get because one of the problems was the bottleneck was transportation. Transporting the marble from quarry to mill by traditional means of using teamsters was proven to be a little bit of a drag of supplying blocks down to meet the public library and the other contracts that were being procured because it was by teamsters. So here's an example of one block being set. So you figure that one block probably weighed about 30 tons, about 60,000 pounds. And they needed to bring down 500,000 cubic feet. So you gotta figure it was gonna take a lot of runs. So they immediately thought, let's develop a railroad. And it was called the Manchester, Dorset, and Granville Railroad because it was originally supposed to be 22 miles long. But, Bill?
The main purpose was simply to get the marble out. So once they got to the quarry, they said, we're not building the rest of it. It's close enough. To give you an idea of why a railroad, according to Tyler Resch's book on the history of Dorset, the first commercial project was the Erie County Courthouse in the 1840s in Erie, Pennsylvania, that was using marble from Dorset. And it was like this, on a horse or oxen cart over to Comstock, New York, where it went onto a canal boat, where it went down the Champlain Canal to Albany, then out the Erie Canal at a mile an hour, to Buffalo, and then down the lake to Erie. And I could just see the job site. Oh, we have a broken block, order a new one. Okay, it'll be here next year. Yeah.
So you figure with the need for 500,000 cubic feet, I actually did the math. Well, I didn't. I did it with the calculator. It's about 82.5 to 85 million pounds of marble they needed to move down the line. So obviously the more efficient way would be to set it down by railroad. Now, when they formed the Manchester, Dorset, and Granville Railroad Corporation, which was part of Norcross West, they capitalized it with $350,000, and this is in 1901. So it wasn't a cheap undertaking. And even based on having a train and figuring the load, the cars could probably carry anywhere from 20 to 30 tons. They were going to still need approximately 1,300 runs up and down the railroad to get all the marble they needed to move from Dorset to Manchester. And so I'm not even going to attempt to tell you the story about this locomotive. That's why I had Bill here. And I know there's some trained people here in the audience, so that's why I have him here.
To simplify the story, they simply bought a second-hand engine from the Rutland Railroad. built in the 1870s, just an old worn out engine. So they had it painted up, the Rutland cleaned it up, painted it up, and this is in Rutland, and sent it down to Manchester for the line.
So it had a crew. This is a great shot of the original crew. And, you know, one of the things that's interesting, and I never continue to be fascinated by, you know, the bridges of history. So my fiance Bonnie is here. So when I was going through this, you can see the fireman, his name was Clarence Curtis. Well, it turns out it was her great-grandfather. And so Clarence contracted Spanish, and he was the fireman for the whole run of the Manchester, Dorset, and Granville Railroad. And he contracted Spanish flu in 1918. And it was something that plagued him the rest of his life, and he actually ended up dying in 1925 at the age of 60. Now, he had a son, also named him Clarence, who was born in 1914. He worked at Mack Molding for over 30 years as a supervisor there. He was the chair of the Arlington Select Board for 16 years, and his son, Scott, is actually sitting right here in the front row. So just, you know, it just goes to show, you know, Clarence was born in 1865, and, you know, we have a tangible connection sitting right here in front of us. So just really kind of blew my mind. So where did the line run? So this is what we're going to be talking about. From quarry to mill, we're going to talk a bit about the Barnumville Gulf and the mill. And I'm going to try to show you all the areas that you can still see today of where the quarry is lined. And actually, Bill actually made up this line, or this map, kind of mapped out pretty close. And if anybody really wants to get in the weeds with this, we actually have the track survey. So if you really want to see where it went, we actually have it from quarry to mill.
I walked the whole line in the 1990s. There was a lot of bushwhacking, but that's, you know, and I just made the map up from where I knew it crossed roads, or where I could figure out where it was. It's pretty accurate.
So when they started, they had the passenger combine, flat cars, and the road, and the engine. And you could probably tell us why they did it this way.
Well, they were a common carrier, which meant they carried passengers and mail and anything else that needed carrying, not just marble. And so they had an old used combine, the passenger car, which carried baggage and passengers. And they had 3 over the course of the life. And then they bought some used flat cars from the Rutland Railroad. Well, they were used worn out and obsolete in 1900, so they were probably, I'm guessing, at the most 30-ton cars. And you see them putting lots of big blocks on them. They overloaded them like crazy. So the fact that a few of them collapsed over the time, who was surprised.
Yeah, and actually here's a shot of the work train during construction 1904 at the road crossing in South Dorset. You can see most of those workers, and I'll talk a little bit about them later as well, a lot of them were Italians and French Canadians. And when you say which crossing were you talking about, this is right at the foot of Morris Hill Road and Route 30. So if you're ever parked at Morris Hill Road taking a right going up towards Dorset, you can actually look across the street, especially this time of year, you can actually see the rail bed in the woods as it starts to make the bend and to cross the road, but it went right across, so that's about where the line went. And then as you went further, so anybody who's walked on the rail trail knows, you know, where the picnic table is, and you got that nice stretch of fields. And this is a shot from 1962. And in 1962, you could still see the railroad cut coming right through the middle of the field. That's what all the arrows are pointing at. Up at the top is North Road, you got Route 7, I have where the driving range is today when you come into Riley Rink, and then of course I had to circle down on the bottom, that was the drive-in in 1962. So we did have a drive-in too, so a little bit of history. So this photograph, which I love, this is coming right out of that cut. Anybody who's been down on the rail trail when you get to the footbridges, and you think, wow, you walk down that steep hill, but actually it used to be a cut through there. And they filled it in when they were doing all the gravel removal. A lot of it was filled back in, but you can see when Bill was talking about the flat cars not being able to handle the load.
Yeah, take a 30-ton car and load it with as many blocks as it would hold, you expect trouble.
So this is another shot just kind of showing, you know, when this is a shot from the 1960, you could still see the routing of the line, and I have that line, the red arrow pointing through where it went, and I'm just going to do a little blow up here. Going down there in the lower right corner, you can kind of see a disturbance in the soil, and that's where the tracks kind of came across. And when they were doing some work on the road at the Aspen, they actually found a couple of the rails that were under Route 7, and they pulled them out, and they kind of sat in the bushes for a little while, and they'll make an appearance again here a little later in the program, so to speak. And this is shot from looking up kind of where Canterbury Road is back down towards the village. That's the Sessions House. The big red X marks where the Vermont Country Store corporate offices are today, and the red line is basically going right through where Northshire Day School is, and the big barn there. And this is the area that you call, we're going to be talking about the Barnumville Gulf. So this is where the train actually went down through Bill. It's a natural gully that was there, and they called it the Barnumville Gulf. And we have a great shot here of some Gandy dancers. They might know it, actually, I'm not going to ask this question to this crowd. So these are Gandy dancers. So Gandy dancers, I actually looked this up though, and I'm going to give the definition and you can tell me if I'm right. Gandy dancers were the railroad section hands who manually laid and maintained track before the adoption of mechanized equipment. The term refers to the rhythmic, synchronized movements of crews as they aligned rails, spiked ties, and tamped ballast in unison, resembling a dance. Sound right?
Close enough. From the Gandy Shovel Company.
And so one of the things, so the Barnumville crossing, we know we just drive straight across here. So when you drive from Route 7, when you drive from Route 7 to say the top of Highland Avenue, it's all flat. Well, you used to have to go down in that gully and then come back out. And they're going to run a train track, and it was fairly busy, probably not as busy as today, but busy. So one of the deals they made with the town when they were doing it was they had to elevate and basically build a bridge. Well, what do you think they built the bridge out of? They built it out of marble, but it was an undertaking, and they actually built a workman's shanty, which this was in the Whipple collection, you know, the workman's shanty, you know, in 1902. A few years ago, I was going through the negatives collections, which none of them are labeled, and I saw another picture, and I was like, oh, I know what that is, because I recognized the three guys in the shanty. You know, well, where was the shanty? And you can see the building down in the back, a little closer up view. I was like, okay, I wonder if that house is still there. So I went down onto Spruce Street, and it's 157 Spruce Street, still there. So the shanty for the building the Barnumville Golf was, you know, just up back of this house. I haven't gone up bushwhacking behind there to see if I could find where it was. But they worked all through the winter of 1902 on building this bridge, this marble bridge. And you can see there's a couple of the workmen basically getting the marble into place. And thankfully we had a few people who snapped off little snapshots as it was coming together. There's the track going right down the middle of the gully.
And I think going to what Shawn said, there's the original stone bridge that went, there's a stream down there. So the old road was right at the top of that. And when they built the new bridge, they just built up because that wasn't high enough to get a train under. So they built the new bridge, but left the old stream crossing.
So they continued to build, and this is kind of what it looked like when it was done. This is a hand-painted image that Mr. Farnham did for us way back when. And here's a shot during the winter when it was completed, and somebody was nice enough to go up on top of the bridge and take a shot looking down the tracks towards the mill. And they had the telegraph lines up there that went right to the quarries.
And that one had me mystified for a while. There are not a lot of bridges over railroads in this area. And then it finally dawned on me, because my old office was right up the hill here.
And this is a photo that I found that was in one of our collections, and I knew where she was standing. I was like, she's got to be standing on the Barnumville Gulf. That's got to be the original bridge. And I knew it was 1952, and I posted on Facebook, and Jim West chimed in, and he goes, oh, that's Mildred Reynolds. I know her. I went to school with her. But by 1960, with cars, because it was single lane, so when they built it, it was horse and carriage. And keeping it maintained, keeping it salted, and the iron bridge it was going across was constantly deteriorating. So ultimately they opted to fill the whole thing in and make the road twice as wide as it was. So it was all filled in. All that marble is underneath there today. And just this will kind of show you where the Gulf is. So this is looking down, you can see Barnumville Road. And the red line is basically right where the railroad tracks went. You can see Northshire Day School is there. and the Vermont Country Store offices. And so when you're driving that one little section, and here's a shot that I took a couple summers ago, where you get to the point where you can see the guardrails on either side, that's the Gulf. And this time of year, if you look down through the Gulf, you can see the raised rail bed going all the way down the center of it. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And this is the one shot that we have of the train in town. This is the train with no flat car pushing the passenger combine up into the Gulf, and the arrow's pointing to the headstones in Factory Point Cemetery. So today you would never be able to see this shot because of the houses and all the trees. You know, tracking the tracks and through the photographs is always fun. It is how I'm able to date some photographs. Like that arrow is pointing to 157 Spruce Street. And if you look down below, you can see the railroad tracks going through. This is looking across the depot. Taken probably sometime between, you know, 1902 and I would say, because Spruce Street doesn't really have a lot of buildings on it, but probably 1915. And then as we track it further, so as the tracks came into town, they crossed Elm Street and they went right behind that large barn. And again, the arrow's pointing to 157 Spruce. And that large barn is there. It used to be Center Hill, past and present, and today's a community workspace barn. A big yellow barn at the foot of Center Hill. And if you look behind that barn today, you can still see the raised rail bed. There's actually a piece of marble sitting right in the middle of it. Huh. So right by the parking lot, you can see that big piece of marble. And you can actually go online now and look at LiDAR, which is basically a radar that actually will remove all the foliage, and you can just trace the imprints in the ground. So this is the Bank of Bennington. It shows you about where Bank of Bennington is in Spruce Street, and you can still see the railroad line as it cut across. I can imagine what it must have been like to see a steam locomotive going through downtown Manchester. And underneath, and if you're there and you park at that parking lot, and there's a big maple tree too, and you will walk under that maple tree and there's still a railroad tie sticking out of the ground with a spike in it. And you can see there's Carter's across the street. And then it crossed 11 and 30, and that's the original substation of Colonial Light and Power. The substation's still there, much bigger now, much, much bigger. But you can see behind it, I've circled, they started stacking, even though they were bringing down, the problem that happened was they were bringing so much marble down, they couldn't get shipped out fast enough. So they started stacking marble all the way back up the line. And you can see they had marble stacked up right behind where the substation is. I guess it would be right about where the Starbucks parking drive-through is today. And again, this shows another shot as we come across. The big X is about where Manchester Discount Beverage is today. And the red arrow is pointing to the building that today houses Ted's Barber Shop and Verdiggy. But you can see, shot from this angle, looking back towards the center, where the VFW, it was all just wide open, both sides of the road. And here's.
Shawn said they were bringing marble down. Somebody had an idea where the various pieces were. And then to me it looks like a jumble of junk, but
so this would be standing on
it wasn't scrap.
Yeah, and standing on the Richville Bridge, the Richville Road as it goes over the west branch of Vattenkill, they just took a shot looking up the river, and then to the train die, or the geeks like us, we look and we see, oh, look at all the marble piled up. That's another way you can tell the dates of this. And today, if you go and look at the west branch, so I hoofed it down behind Earth and Sea and looked at the west branch, and you can still see the bridge abutments, the marble bridge abutments, and the large arrow points to where the Pendleton store is. Or you could park by Pendleton and walk over there, and you can see all the marble kind of stacked up there on both sides of the river. And the shots that one of the photographers, I don't know who it was, who basically jumped on top of the passenger combine and snapped off a bunch of shots that I get to share with you. The arrow points to the building, that's still there, that house on Center Hill, and then Factory Point Cemetery up there at the top. But you can see the marble was just stacked. Yeah, go grab that piece of marble down there on this.
Well, they had a way of doing that.
Yeah.
I hope you have that picture.
Yeah, so the Manley house that it's pointing to, so today it's painted yellow, but this is a picture of what it looked like when it was built. And it pretty much looks exactly the same, just painted yellow today, right on Center Hill, built by Mark Manley, who actually opened the combination cache, which is today the Mountain Mill.
And it's a distinctive roof, so it's easy to pick out in photos.
Yeah. And you can see in the yard, actually, there was a spur that sent that way, you know, at night, they had to have a place to put the engine.
Yep.
And another shot looking, and you gotta figure, all that marble that they had stacked there, all they had a place to go, not all of it made, but, as I mentioned, there was the engine house. This is a closer view. You can see up top is the cemetery, and then you can see the Manley house, and that big building there on the right, that's where they tucked the engine in at night. And there's a different angle, and you can see there's the engine house on the left.
And then this is a little crane, bit of trivia here. When the Rich Lumber operation came to town, they came from Wanakena, New York, and they they built a town and everything out there. And they had a Barnhart loader, that's a Barnhart loader. It was a little steam crane that moved along log cars and loaded the log cars. But it was heavy. So to haul it up the mountain here meant they would have to take fewer empty cars up, so they didn't use it. So apparently they sold it to the MD&G. So if you needed to go out and pick up some of those blocks of marble we've been looking at, that's how they could have done it. Because you couldn't get 5 guys to lift that chunk of marble. So they had a little steam crane. And when I saw that thing, I said, that's a Barnhart loader.
Well, it must have been the other thing too for stacking along the rails.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you didn't just stop and grab a couple guys. Here, guys, let's just move this over here. Yeah. And you know, the train, they would come in and they would bring the flat cars in here. And I mentioned there was a traveling crane, and here are the arms for the traveling crane. There's the traveling crane there, and then they would unload it from the flat cars, and then off they would go to Dorset again. And just to give you an idea, like of today, so this is what it would look like. It would have come right across the West Branch. And then they would have had that one little offshoot to go to the engine house, and then it would come down at the bottom. It would come in and meet up with the Rutland. And going back to 1962, even as late as 1962, you could still see it. That red arrow points to the building that's today Mancher's Discount Beverage. It was just built, but you can still see I got that long. That's where the rail was. So they cleaned up all the marble that was on the north side of the West Branch, where they built, you know, now the Pendleton building is there, but they left all of the marble that was on the south side. So if you were to actually go today, I took this picture a few years ago, if you actually park at Earth and Sea and just kind of walk over towards the bushes, you'll know where the rail was, because all of a sudden you're gonna run into a wall of marble blocks that are still sitting there, and they stretch from the river all the way to the foot of Lincoln Avenue. And then there's a couple areas in that section, which is all privately owned, so, I mean, you probably should get permission. I just kind of found myself walking through there. But it's a couple of huge mounds where they don't mow, and you go over there and you just kind of start kicking back, and it's just all marble blocks, just all laying.
It's all marble and ticks.
Marble and ticks, yeah, lots of ticks, lots of ticks. And this is at the foot of Union, or foot of Lincoln Avenue, looking back, and you can still see, they still mow it where the spur was. And, you know, I mean, it costed, and they would post, I mean, they made a commercial endeavor out of it. And actually, Kiki Lefebvre is here, sitting in the back, second to last row, and he actually told me his father actually rode on the MD&G line with his brother a couple times. You know, so again, one of those little bridges to the past. And I'll let Bill tell the story about this.
This is someone, I don't remember who, came by my office one time with this framed schedule and rate board. And I wish I remember who it was, and I don't know where it went. But what I found interesting, it's things like the three main station stops were Manchester, South Dorset, which was the bottom of the one you pointed out. Yeah. Morris Hill Road,
Yeah.
and Quarry, which was the end of the line. But there are these others, like there's Thompson's and Phelps. As far as I can figure out, these were farmhouses. And I think Thompson's was at the crossing of Route 7, where they made an arrangement with the railroad that they would take express packages, or if anyone wanted to get off there. So they had a rate for it to go to Thompson's. But it wasn't really a station, it's just you got off at Thompson's farm.
It's kind of like the Green Mountain Line that you on the bus. Yeah. Stop here!
Bill Phelps is where that barn is fallen down. on the left side of Route 30. It was just above the little store, that was the Phelps Farm.
Oh,
Okay.
so that's Mike Powers in the back for those of you at home. So the old blacksmith shop that
Right.
is just a little bit above North Road.
Buzz Eichel.
Buzzy Eichel's shop, yep,
Yeah.
okay.
So nobody at home can hear that. So when we were talking about stations, it was where do we find pictures of stations? And this is the only photo. I was looking through the photo collection, and this is that one big building you see in the center is where the Ted's Barber Shop is today. And I look over on the right and I see this little, well, it almost looks like a bus stop from when I was a kid. And I realized you could still see the line going across. You can kind of see the marble and the stone right through there. And I was like, oh, and I sent it to Bill and I said, Bill, I think I found a picture of the Manchester station. Very exciting stuff at the Manchester Historical Society. It caused all kinds of, at least for two of us anyway. I don't think any of the others really care.
I was talking one time in Dorset, and a woman came up to me afterwards and said, her mother from Dorset had started her, if she was leaving from Dorset to go back to Manhattan, would start by taking the MD&G from South Dorset to Manchester. And I was never sure, well, from where did the train stop at Manchester? Because it didn't go to the main station, which is our GMALL storage building now. So it stopped here, and you got off and took your bag and you walked over to the station. It wasn't very far, but if it was raining, it was miserable. But that was the station.
So read about where Pendleton is today. That's where the train station would have been. We have quite a few pictures of the Dorset station. And actually, this is one of the few shots that we have of the Dorset station with the passenger combine and boxcars.
Well, it was the end of the line. And this was essentially what they call the team track. So if you ordered some grain or lumber or whatever, and you were in Dorset or somewhere beyond, it was delivered to the end of the line, and you brought your horse and wagon in and picked up your cargo and took it on yourself. That's as far as you could go by rail. And it was a team track. Every station had a team track that was the public track for freight.
And this lasted, I think, until, I know that Terry Tyler at Dorset remembers it. He remembers seeing it until it collapsed into the ground, basically. It just basically stayed in place and then rotted away. I should probably called him and asked him.
And that's the Route 30 right now.
That's Route 30. And, and as I go through, Mr. Bowen had a photography studio right there, so he would often take pictures of people coming up the road, and in the background I'd often catch pictures of the station, which you can see over there on the left. But we talked quite a little bit about the swimming quarry, and the plateau quarry actually played a pretty essential role. A lot of the marble went down to the public library, but the plateau quarry, they could get these enormous monoliths out of there, where these continuous pieces of marble that they would use for columns, and you can see that's them hoisting out one of the columns. And one of the things that was interesting was, because I sit and I stare at these photographs and try to find little details, and in the back there is a little shack, and that's where the derrick operators would sit. And you can see on the side it says George McBride, 1910, because they would get bored and they grab grease and they would start doing graffiti on the side. It was bright white. They start drawing things. And as I started going through more pictures of the quarry, especially the plateau quarry, they would have graffiti all over, write their names and the dates and draw pictures. And this was one, George McBride, 1902. You can see he even drew a little profile. Whether or not it was his profile, I'm not sure. But when I got to go up to visit the plateau quarry, I was told that they actually chiseled it into the side, and actually I walked all along the edge and finally found where he had done it. So it says George McBride, 1910, with a profile there. It's almost, I figured in another 50 years, if somebody doesn't rake out the leaves and everything, you probably won't be able to see it. But this is what the plateau quarry looks like, not today, but a few years ago. It's just as big as the swimming quarry. And one little story I'll tell. So they would load flat cars, and what they would do is they had the flat cars because it was all on hills, and they would just basically anchor the flat cars, and they would drop a piece of marble on it. You can see down there on the left, there's a workman standing there, and the derrick is swinging around with a block of marble. And then, you know, he would get off, and they would take it back. But, well, one day, the flat cars broke loose, 2 of them, and just basically started rolling from South Dorset to Manchester. And it was all downhill from there, literally. So there was no way to stop it. Now, it was written up in the newspaper because it was the one major accident that could have been a tragedy. Well, just like today, when, you know, they had school kids that went up there to watch this whole thing be done. And the school kids had just left 4 minutes beforehand. So they got to those telegraph lines you saw. They telegraphed saying we got, you know, runway flat cars. They got the kids off the combine, out of the passenger. They got the engine off the main line.
But they didn't have time to move the passenger car.
So the passenger car basically got split, like it was described in the newspaper, like a can of tuna. It split and lifted all the wood, you know, and the only thing that broke was a window. It was the only thing that broke. And Scott, there's your grandfather there again on the far left, standing there, because of course everybody wanted to pose for pictures. And you can see, let me grab my little laser pointer.
There's a flat car that was probably in front of the passenger car.
So, and you know, being good Yankees that they were, they didn't want to waste it, so they basically turned that flat car into a workbench, basically, a covered work shack. That's what they called it, work shack. But those monoliths that they pulled out, I mean, they were 43 tons, about 86,000 pounds, and they were pulling them out basically as fast as they could because they would basically carve columns out of them. And this is a great shot of the quarry workers up on there because everybody wanted to pose with these big monoliths because they were the word of the day. And the great thing about this is from Terry Tyler's collection, and he actually wrote down all the names on the back. And you'll recognize a lot of the names if you're local. I mean, we got the Morrows, the Tousleys, the Kellys, Johnson, McBrides, the Standards, the Connells, the McWaynes, you know, the Reeds, Stewart, the Bowens, McBride, and then down at the bottom, Joe Italian. So I'm guessing he was the one that wasn't a local. And even the ladies wanted to get on it, so, you know, they would climb up on there.
And these may have been wooden cars, but these are truss rods underneath supporting the weight, and a normal flat car has 4 truss rods. So you can tell these were heavy-duty cars, specifically for... The Rutland carried a lot of marble from Proctor and West Rutland and stuff, so they had a lot of heavy-duty cars, and it was no problem. They didn't have to use the old Manchester, Dorset, and Granville cars that kept collapsing.
And they would use this for advertising. I mean, these blocks, you've seen a few of these types of photos, 3 blocks of plateau white marble weighing 43 tons each, 3 of 13 columns quarried for the new Memorial Continental Hall for the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution in Washington, D.C. And you'll see a picture of that later. They actually took 13 columns, which represented the 13 original colonies. The building's still there. I'll show you a picture of it a little bit later. And you know, and they would put that right on the ends, and as the trains would roll through, this is actually the Norcross operations in Providence, Rhode Island. You can see it says right on the faces of those 2 monoliths, Norcross West, Dorset, Vermont. And there's still some of those monoliths are there. That's actually Lyman Orton. I went up there when I visited one of the plateau quarry one time, and Lyman was with me. Now, he's not the tallest guy in the world, but it gives you an idea how big those monoliths were. And that was a whole stack of them, and there was another stack. So there's probably a good 10, 15 of them still there. And as I was mentioning about the workers, there's a few shots that we have of the workers in the quarries. And most of them, we don't know their names. We know a few people, once in a while, besides Joe Italian. A lot of them were French Canadians and Italians, and they followed the work. And when the work ended, they would move again. You know, they came from West Rutland down to here. And then when a lot of people left to go to the granite quarries out in Vancouver, British Columbia, so they just went where the work was. And you know, this is actually a bill for the Italian tenants in Manchester Depot, and you can see they had their names written down, and they were charged $5.50 to $6.50 a piece for a week's rent. One interesting story, as I was looking through some of the payroll records, was Frank Perry. You know, he worked 36 hours, 19 and 4/9 cents. I don't know how they did the partial cents for $7. And $7 is about $229. That was for 4 days worth of work, 9-hour days. And Frank Perry's great-great-great-granddaughter is actually a student at Burton. Frank's granddaughter is actually Lorraine Perry, Harrington. But on May 20th, 1913, the Vermont Marble Company up in Proctor bought all the Norcross West operations. And while things ran for a little period of time, the ultimate goal, I'm afraid, was basically to shut in all the operations because they didn't want the competition. And Orlando Norcross wrote saying basically we have to give up the Manchester mill on July 20th. He did still have some interest because a lot of the marble that was quarried, he still was able to sell, and you could buy a flat car of marble for $15. Of course you had to move it. But if you go around Manchester Depot or in Manchester and you see some of these houses with marble foundations, it's usually a good idea that you know that was probably built right around 1915.
Yeah, there was a lot of free marble, scrap marble available.
In March 1914, he wrote this letter, and I had it transcribed so you don't have to read it. It says, "Dear Jackson," Jackson was the plant superintendent. He said, "I suppose you know I have been sick not so much in body as mind. That miserable Dorset has caused most of it. I wish you could write me a long letter and as you choose, telling me what Vermont has done in a short memorandum about marble is left, and tell me how old you are." And it kind of goes on, but it was basically, you know, he was basically lamenting that the Norcross brothers, they basically went bankrupt while they were building the New York Public Library, because apparently Mr. Norcross did not make very many wise investment decisions and spent more money than was coming in. But
Wasn't he busy losing his marbles at that point?
and then he lost his marbles.
And I believe Jackson's house was the little shingle-style house on Elm Street that was Phil Arrett's dentist office for a while.
Yeah. And so one of the changes they did make in 1916 was
They scrapped their old locomotive. They brought a locomotive. Vermont Marble owned the Clarendon-Pittsford Railroad, which was their marble line that ran from Pittsford down to West Rutland and stuff. So they upgraded the equipment. They brought one of their engines down, and they brought the third combine down.
So this is from a negative in our collection. It's about 1 inch square. And I found it, and I would just go through and hold them up to the light and look at it, and I was like, oh, that looks like a train. And then, of course, I recognized the engine house. So I scanned it, and I was like, good damn. And I sent it to Bill, much celebrating. And this photo is fairly well known, I suppose. This is during the March 1916 snowstorm. We have other pictures from town, but this is them plowing coming across North Road.
Yeah, the other one that goes with it.
Should we show it to them?
Yeah.
And that's what
This has been in the Manchester Historical Society collection for a long time, and I was always trying to figure out where that was. Well, the rock is a defining thing, but even when I walked it, I didn't see it. I just didn't.
And it's still there.
The rock's still there.
So Robin Werner, who's here, he set up that photo. So if you go there today, you can see there's a little sign with a photo with a string leading right to the rock. So you can't say, well, here's the photo, where's the rock? Just follow the string. Is the string still there, Robin?
I don't know.
And then, the photographer snapped a few shots on the way out. But, once Vermont Marble bought it, they shut it in. I mean, today it would be, they would say, what is it? Oh, antitrust, right? They wouldn't do it. But up here in Vermont, they still let them buy. They basically, they bought all the operations. They said, oh, yeah, we'll keep it going. We'll keep it going. They didn't.
They were just trying to shut down the competition.
So basically what happened was, so the quarries operated probably until about 1916, that and the mill. And they shut it. They basically shut everything down. They let the MD&G run until about 1917, and then they ceased that too. With the the advent of World War I was coming. So in all, it's estimated that approximately 15.8 million cubic feet of marble was extracted from those two quarries and the quoted quarry, and brought down on the MD&G. And then, of course, once the bilge pumps weren't running anymore, it started filling up with groundwater. And they left the derricks there. I saw pictures, I've seen pictures as late as the 1950s that the derricks were still, those long poles you can see, that they were still there. And even some of the steam pipes, they used to be in the woods, now they cleaned it all up now, but I took pictures of some of the steam chimneys that they had, stoves, what do you call them, stovepipes.
Surprised the scrap drive didn't get them.
Yeah, right, yeah. And when I went up this is a plateau quarry, starting to fill up with water, and I have this large base where they had the derrick. They basically left this one piece and put a derrick there and quarried all around it. You can see there's a little bit, well, you probably can't see back there, but there's a little graffiti around there. And when I was up there, I was actually able to spot that derrick base. It's underwater now, but you can still see where the derrick base was. The spikes sticking out of it. And the mill, it ceased operation in 1916, and this is taken from basically the big hill up behind the car dealership. You can see the flat roof of the Northshire bookstore right here. There's the bookstore. There's right down here is a little engine house that was moved in 1920 to Adams Park. And the big circle, that gives you an idea of the scale of the mill. This is just a part of it. And another shot from a little bit later from the water tower on the depot station where RK Miles is. This is now Joe's corporate offices. This is Joe Miles, the RK Miles corporate offices, and you can see the mill across the road there.
They closed in part of the end of it at some point, and they also changed the steel stack to a brick one. They were still, here we have steel, and the latest one was brick.
Right. And so I wanted to tell this quick story. So there's the mill taken from probably the top of the old Battenkill Inn, which was Grabbers. It burned down in 1993, just based on the angle. But that's the office building. And the office building was actually purchased by Greeley Roberts in 1932 for $500 and a little piece of land, 1 1/6 acres across the road. And he picked it up and he moved the house right across the road. So one day Cynthia Kilburn saw me staying, because if you look at this, look at the house, and then you look at this, I say, well, the windows don't match up. And so I went over to Kilburn's, or the Manchester Variety Store, and I was standing in the parking lot looking at it, and I realized, yeah, they just literally picked the building up, moved it across the street, set it back down, and never turned it around.
Never turned it, just moved it.
So that was the back of the office building. And, all of this started from that one contract in New York Public Library. And November 1906 was when the last shipment of stone for the library left, and they continued. And there were dozens of other buildings built out of this.
Just a side note, you've seen it before, the derrick operator, you can always figure out the operator's room or his building because it was wide open. There were no radios. He had to see hand signals from somewhere where they were signaling to go up or go down. So it doesn't matter whether it's this quarry or a granite quarry in Barrie, the derrick operator always had a wide open view.
And so in 1934 is when they basically knocked the mill down. So at the cost of, I think they invested about $2 million into all the operations. And they basically lasted until about 1918, and everything was scrapped by 1934. And then the rails were pulled up, and it basically sat empty. In 1961, Central Vermont Power Service, CVPS, purchased the plot of land, and Terry Tyler went down there with his camera and took pictures of the remnants of, those are some of the hollowed out when they would do the carved columns. You can still see those around every once in a while. Mr. Snow down in Arlington, in East Arlington, he has a couple of them in his front yard. J.K. Adams has one up on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah. But here's shots of, the remnants of, what was left of the mill. And this is looking back towards, well, that would have been Tate's or Brown's was there for a little while. That was before they built the big barn. But, so today when you drive around, what are some of the buildings that are left? Well, you recognize this church perhaps in Dorset. That's all built out of Norcross marble. You know, the bridge down in the center, it was a wooden bridge, then it switched to an iron bridge. Then in 1912, they built a marble bridge. That building in the back that says Combination Cash Store, that's the Mountain Goat today. But you can see it was quite an exciting day when they finally expanded the bridge and it was safe to go. And actually, they actually invited W.H. Shaw invited President Taft to come by, and he was unable to come for the ceremonies. And the letter is still in the Shaw family.
You'll also see these marble railing posts. When they widened the bridge, those ended up all over town.
Yeah.
And you look and you'll see them at the beginning of people's driveways, and I assume it was one of these things, if you can haul it away, you can have it.
Yeah, there's a couple on Mount Aeolus Lane, there's a couple at the entrance of Southern Mount Arts Center, and a couple other driveways going up West Road. And that marble arch actually is still underneath there. They cut some of it away, I'm not sure why they did, but this is when they were building the roundabout. You know, it's kind of cool to see the original marble arch there. And this is the quarry today. And the New York Public Library, all of that is Dorset marble. I took these pictures in 2022 when I was down there. It's all marble, except for Patience and Fortitude. The lines out front, they're actually pink Tennessee marble. And if you go inside, has anybody ever been inside the New York Public Library?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, quite a few. I mean, it's just, if you get the chance, go down.
They have no idea that it came from Dorset. They have some historical stuff, no idea.
No idea. But if you go, I mean, it's just magnificent to walk around in there and see all the marble and know where it came from. This is the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. And those columns that you see, all one piece of marble. This is the Boston Safe Deposit and Trust Company, which is a couple blocks off. It's on Franklin Street, just off Post Office Square. I see Gloria's looking at her watch. It's going to be just a little bit longer. This is the Daughters of the American Revolution. This is their headquarters today in Constitution Hall, and on two sides there are the 13 columns representing the original 13 colonies, and that all came from Dorset. Temple Israel in Boston is actually now the Morse Auditorium, which is actually owned by Boston University, but it was originally a synagogue. But somebody did get ambitious in 1924 and 1925, Pat and Tom McCormick, and they operated what was called a flanged wheeled motor truck over the rusted rails to haul marble from the Kent Root Quarry.
And it was a surplus World War I Army truck with railroad wheels on it. That's the only picture we've ever seen of it. Some creative engineering.
But it seemed to have worked, but they didn't make any money because it only lasted for just a few months.
Yeah.
So, you know, just kind of, so all this was, when they pulled up all the rails, it was still there. And just to go back a little bit, so in 1983, Congress amended Section 8D of the National Trail System Act to create a program to preserve all corridors called rail banking, through which corridors that would otherwise be abandoned can be preserved for future rail use by converting them into interim trails. And so starting back in 1987, thank you David Cannell for all this. Starting back in 1987, the Manchester Town Plan stated the town should make an effort to acquire public lands to preserve open space and provide additional recreational opportunities. Similar language continued in the town plan through the 1990s and into the 21st century.
And in most cases, railroads were built with a right-of-way across someone's land. So you got a right-of-way, you didn't own the land, but you had the right to build the railroad there as long as the railroad ran. And when the railroad was, if the railroad was given up, the land reverted to the underlying owner. However, in this case, Norcross West bought the land. So there was a long, skinny strip of land that was actually owned. It wasn't a right-of-way across other landowners.
Right. So enter Robin and Amy Werner along with Jim Hand and Bill Drunzik. We're sitting here looking at the maps. In July of 2009, Old Railroad Bed LLC was formed, consisting of aforementioned folks. And a few months later, On November 23rd, 2009, Old Railroad Bed LLC purchased the old rail line from Omnia for $39,614 for the purpose of creating public recreational trail for the town of Manchester. And so once they started, they started eking out. Some of the landowners, along with interested volunteers, began, basically grubbing out the trail and the footprint along the old rail line. Cutting the brush, cutting up and removing trees that had fallen across the line. All sorts of debris was there. Not everybody was a fan. So the work kind of went on until 2012, when some of the adjoining landowners filed a lawsuit challenging the legal ownership of the Old Railroad Bed LLC. And that lawsuit went all the way to the Vermont Supreme Court, and in March of 2014, a legal decision was adjudicated dismissing all of their claims. And so work began. So over the next 6 years, and thank you, Robin Werner, for providing me with so many great photos. And we could be here for an hour, but here's a kind of a little collage of photos of all the work that went on during that time. The improvements were made along with Bike Manchester, a local organization dedicated to promoting biking throughout the region. And the trail was really starting to take shape. Many people were actively using the trail for biking, walking, running, snowshoeing, and cross-country skiing. And, it wasn't easy. I mean, I know what this section looks like today versus what it looks like now. Countless tours. I don't know how many tours Robin and Amy and Bill, this is in 2017 when I went out there with Sharice Madigan from the Journal, and we were out there walking along and, telling the history. And, this is 2020, there were 5 streams to cross, and they had to find alternatives, 3 pass alternatives. The total construction for doing all this, for making the bridges, was anywhere from $624,000 to $1.6 million. And those are my 2 little boys there. This is during COVID. The rail trail was great during COVID because we had to go out there and walk. But that's what the bridges look like. They were just the boards across the trail. So with the estimated rail trail construction, up to as much as $1.6 million, Bill, who's the primary stockholder, he owned a construction company and a property development company. He commenced to work on building the trail. And he utilized, commercial excavating equipment, tree removal experts, and construction workers, and hundreds of hours of volunteers who came in, and most of it was completed by 2022. And at the Town of Manchester's 2022 annual meeting, Article 4, in part stated, shall the town vote to authorize up to $120,000 from the Capital Improvement Contingency Reserve Fund to purchase land from Old Railroad Bed LLC. They voted yes. And on January 2nd, 2023, there was a ribbon cutting ceremony on the trail celebrating the transition of ownership from Old Railroad Bed to the Town of Manchester. And, well, I guess it doesn't look as nice up there on the screen as it does on my computer, but it was a cold day, if I remember correctly. A very, very cold day. This is actually a picture from December 2025, and they get out there all the time, and they put the garland up on the bridges. And remember those railroad ties I kind of told you about an hour ago? Well, if you go to the North Road parking lot, they're actually right there now. Those were set in August of 2025 after being pulled from under Route 7 by the Aspen Motel. So one quick little hole that I'll go down, a rabbit hole. So right between the 2 bridges, the 2 walking bridges, there's a couple big pieces of marble sitting there. And if you look at the top of them, you'll actually see they were called pins and feathers. And so when they would drill down through the marble, they would basically put in these spikes and then put a larger spike in between and basically pound down. And under the pressure, they would have to do it, they'd hit all along the line. And when they got to a certain point, the rock would split. Well, obviously this one must have gone wrong because the pins were still in there and the flat car must have broken. So it was just pushed off to the side, but they're still there. So it was kind of one little evidence you could see of how they used to actually break the larger blocks of marble into smaller pieces.
And that was supposed to be the foreman's job when they had everything set up. He was the one that would go along with the hammer because he had a feel for how many hits to put here and to split it evenly. This was a bad day.
Especially when it broke.
Yeah.
So, and if you go there today, there's benches along the line, and it's really the people who actually made this, such a rich community resource for us. And, how exciting it is to be able to walk along this and, in all the seasons throughout the year. And, it's down mostly, has the Sure Pack. Not all of it follows along exactly where the MD&G was, because you'd have to walk through a sand pit and, probably through Town Hall and down through there, but, you still can get a pretty good chunk of it. And they just recently finished the last leg, so you can actually walk up Squires Lane and go through that one last little bit up to the Dorset School. I haven't done it yet, and I was planning on doing it this winter, and just haven't made it up there yet, so I don't have any pictures of it. So, I just kind of want to end with this one photograph, which I think says a lot. So, which I stole off your Facebook page for the Manchester Rail Trail. And this is in November 2025. And it said, today, Bike Manchester, Vermont volunteers planted 450 daffodil and bluebell bulbs at the historic Marble Rail Trail North Road parking lot. Can't wait till spring. So when spring comes, and we're guaranteed to get spring, I think, right? It's gonna look really fantastic. So thank you all so much for coming tonight. Do you have any last minute thoughts about daffodils?
Daffodils? No.
Does anybody have any questions?
So were the other boards in Dorset,
Cole.
so were the other boards in Dorset, like up on Alshed, except was the marble transported down and also on this?
So the only marble, so the question was any of the other quarries up on Dorset Mountain, was that marble brought down through the MD&G? And the answer is no, it was just strictly the Norcross West. And Scott asked if they used wood or coal in the engine, and it was coal.
Cool. Yeah.
It was all coal fired. Anybody else have any questions? So just to go a total sidebar about the pews that everybody's sitting in. So Bill and I have a theory that those pews, so the church next door used to be a brick church, then that was torn down in 1870 and the one that we see there was built. So we think these pews that are back there were from the original church. So those,
I haven't been able to prove that, but they either went to the little old seat maker and said, we need some wooden benches for the courthouse, and he said, I'm making some church pews, or just put them on the other order. Or they came from the church, and everybody in town got a brick fireplace when the brick church came down. So, they logically, why not recycle some pews?
Where are the cushions?
well, you'll have to talk to Sarah McClintock about that.
They're under construction.
She's sitting over here in the jury box. Actually, she's not sitting in a cushion chair, but that's why the jurors over here in the cushion chairs. So really, everybody, thank you very much. We really appreciate you all coming out tonight for our